Welcome. It's the Juicy House. Today at the Juicy House, the place of the Juicy One. You might know me as CDP or Caesar Pleaser. We're doing they would call it a let's read, right? I've heard that term before. That's what we're doing today. You're gonna be joining me on reading with me, or at least listening to me read, my current reading focus. And that's The Science of Racism, everything you need to know that, that you don't probably know yet. Excuse me. This is by Keon West. It's one of my library books that I've chosen. I have other books that I'm gonna go through as well. Can't wait to go through the Quran with all of you. I'm sure that's gonna be a very civil fucking conversation, but um, I'll preface that when I get there. But yeah, with this book, I'm currently about almost 5 chapters in. You're gonna be joining me as I finish, I think, chapter 4, and then in this video, we're gonna be doing all of chapter 5. Is at least the plan, unless I have to stop or whatever. Yeah, it's my morning Uber grind. Hopefully by February, no more Uber. But I saw Kai Sanat was trending recently because he's been starting to read and do all kinds of other things in the secret side channel that he had that somebody found. And I'm like, you know what? Why not monetize my another fucking another hobby, right? First it was gaming, now it's my reading, right? But generally, I think this will also force me to read more because, like, I try to have time, but then, like, I'm just so busy doing all these other things, whether it's editing, or maybe I'm out with the gym with the wifey, or maybe it's just a date with wifey, or maybe I'm with the homies, or I'm with my mom, or my sister, or I'm trying to do some Uber stuff, or maybe I'm trying to, like, all right, let me have some time to watch something, right? Whatever. And it's been tough to be able to find time for this because I also have to be mindful of, like, all right, well, who's here at the house, right? So when I can, go ahead and go through my reading with you guys, just because I think it's interesting to be able to show people what I'm reading, but also I think it's good to try to remind people, hey, you should be reading as well. Improve your comprehension, right? See different parts of the world out there that you probably might have not ever at some point. Whether it's like, oh yeah, man, I would have never heard about this one player if it was for reading this book or fucking whatever, right? Learn about the town that you're in, learn about a whole other country, right? Um, I might dive into like the Halo books. I'm almost done with the Fall of Reach. I don't mind rereading it in order to do it for with you guys. I don't know. We'll see, because there's a lot of Halo books I want to get to, and as much as I really like that book, well, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. But the Juicy House is, of course, everything that encompasses the Juicy One, right? Ignore the line. So, like, I start to tap in. I continue my skateboarding. That when I can, I'll make sure we have an update on that. My bad, y'all. I got y'all. For people that have been like, hey, so how's the skating doing? But yeah, I plan to get a pair of meta glasses. I know people have their whole thoughts on that, whatever. I like the idea of being able to have like something that can be actively recording out using my phone. I can still use my phone for other things that I need, right? So for me, I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Probably do some bike trips or something, or like some hikes. I can like record the whole thing, right? That sounds awesome. And yeah, that being said, let's begin, or well, continue for me, but begin for you guys. The Science of Racism. If you want to check it out, by all means, boom. Not sponsored. I wish I was. That'd be cool. A book card that I'm using. Unfortunately, we couldn't go to this because I got sick during the holidays, so it's unfortunate. But soon. That's why I have all my cards. You're currently on my stack of cards, and actually, I think this is today's Mon that I pulled out, or maybe this is yesterday's. But Muck. If you don't know, fun fact, my first level 100 was Muck. Just my cousin. Bunch of rare candies, you know what I mean? All right. Maybe there's a setup I can do one day where I can also dual set up with another camera and show the book, right? But as of now, you have to take my word. And I'm gonna show you right now where we're starting off. 62 at the subtitle, bringing the individual and the systemic together. Tap in. You might be uncomfortable with calling voter ID laws an example of systemic racism. Perhaps you, like author and journalist Douglas Murray, see voter ID laws as something that can unite the American left and right in an attempt to uphold the integrity of the vote. Maybe like the British government, you believe that voter ID laws would prevent voter fraud and protect democracy, especially from those 7 people who may or may not have tried something dodgy in the voting booth in 2022. Maybe you see support for voter ID laws as motivated by concerns that are noble or at the very least racially neutral. If you do, the scientific evidence on this point may surprise you. In 2013, Wilson and Brewer analyzed survey data from a representative sample of 906 American participants. The survey included a number of variables such as political ideology and party affiliation, media use, perceptions of voters fraud, and various demographic identifiers. However, the two variables we're most interested in are the participants' support for voter ID laws, and something Wilson and Brewer refer to as racial reassessment. This second variable was measured by getting participants to indicate their level of agreement with statements such as African Americans bring up race only when they need to make an excuse for their failure, and I disapprove of any special considerations that African Americans receive, such as in college admissions or in the workplace, because it's unfair to other Americans. As you can tell, this is a pretty explicit measure of anti-black racism. If support for voter ID laws was purely driven by concerns about preventing voter fraud and protecting democracy, the researchers should have found that perceptions of voter fraud were predictive of support for voter ID laws, and that very little else should have mattered once perceptions of fraud were accounted for. Explicit racism or racial sentiment shouldn't have been relevant, and therefore shouldn't have predicted support for voter ID laws. Of course, this is not what Wilson and Brewer found. Not surprisingly, even when all the relevant predicators were taken into account, even after adjusting for the effects of politics and media, and even knowledge about voter ID laws, racial, on to page 64 now, resentment remained a significant predictor of support of these ID laws. In the researchers' own words, the effect found for racial resentment suggests that ostensibly race-neutral voter ID laws carry racial symbolism. Now, if you don't know what ostensibly means, give me 1 second. I got y'all. Ostensibly means for appearances alone, I believe. Yeah, from appearances alone. I looked it up as well. So it shows basically that, yeah, man, it's like as fuck race-neutral voter ID laws carry racial symbolism. There's that word again, ostensibly. In 2016, Banks and Hicks recruited hold on, I'm going to look for something to hold my place. Recruited 723 white American participants for an experiment that took place over 2 waves. In the first wave, participants completed measures indicating how they felt about black people. It's worth noting that these were measures of both explicit racism and implicit racism. Then, a few days later, to give the participants enough time to shake off any effects from completing wave 1, the researchers asked the participants to return and complete the second wave of the experiment. The second wave was more interesting. As you've probably guessed, it involved measuring the participants' support for voter ID laws. However, before participants indicated their support for voter ID laws, they were randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions, each of which, via a well-established technique that uses a combination of pictures and writing tasks, induce a different emotional state. Relaxation, the control condition; anger, the condition number 2, or fear, condition 3. Just like Wilson and Brewer before them, Banks and Hicks also found that the higher levels of racism predicted greater support for voter ID laws. That much was unsurprising. The more interesting finding concerned the effects of the emotional manipulations. Explicit racism predicted more support for voter ID laws, no matter what emotional state the participants were in. However, implicit racism was a particularly strong indicator of support for voter ID laws when the participants were afraid. That's right, if you scare white people, the ones with high levels of implicit racism respond to this fear by strengthening their support for voter ID laws. This is how systemic, and individual racism work together. Voter ID laws would have racist effects even if nobody in the entire world was racist at all. But of course, we're not so lucky. Some individual people do have racist views and take part of racist behaviors. One manifestation of their individual racism is to increase their support for pillars of structural racism, at least under certain circumstances. Though they might not acknowledge it explicitly, on some level, people do recognize the systemic racism of voter ID laws, and when they're feeling afraid, they are willing and able to weaponize that knowledge. So far in this chapter, I focus on two manifestations of systemic racism: immigration laws and voter ID laws, which the immigration probably I read a little bit earlier about. This focus has allowed me to outline some of the history and the research supporting our understanding of systemic racism. However, there's a lot that I haven't discussed. I haven't discussed poll taxes, literacy tests, or residency requirements, or as prerequisites for voting. I haven't discussed recent bans on providing water and food to those lining up to vote. I haven't discussed the geographical distribution of polling stations or transportation to them. Beyond the domain of voting, I haven't discussed the links between property taxes and funding for children's education in America. I haven't discussed the UK's stop and search laws or the American practice of redlining, which means to designating certain areas, surprise, these just happen to be the most ethnic minority areas, as hazardous to investments, HTIs, and therefore not lending money or providing mortgages to people who live in those areas. I haven't discussed I didn't fucking know that, damn. I haven't discussed the banning of hoodies in shopping areas in the London borough of Rumford or the Wolf Chase Gallery Mall in Memphis, Tennessee. I haven't discussed the fact that many places in the UK still explicitly ban a range of hairstyles from schools and places of work. Also, in America too, you look at Texas, there was a whole kid that had I think it was dreadlocks or curls or like an afro. I forgot one of that. That was also absolutely racially motivated. From schools and places of work, many of which just so happen to be natural black hairstyles. Page 66, by the way. I haven't mentioned that as of 2022, only 18 to 50 American states have passed laws prohibiting discrimination based on their hair texture. What? Really? Oh, no, I have thoughts. I wear dreadlocks myself, and so even today I can legally be prevented from accessing certain employment or services in many British establishments in almost 2/3 of U.S. states. Nonetheless, I hope the point has been made. The purpose of chapters 2 and 3, you should, if you ever are curious, go to your library. If they're still around, my library is done. I had to go to a whole other library. They say because they're renovating, but probably true. But the fact that it says, "Oh, we'll be back in 2028," I'm like, okay, so this is because of the budget cuts of the education system under the Trump administration. Got it. Was to show that a lot of people and a lot of circumstances do a lot of racist things. The purpose of this chapter has been to show that even the severe, ubiquitous, sometimes dangerous racism that those earlier chapters outlined is far from the whole picture. Even if you have the magical lamp, or snapped your fingers, or wrinkled your nose, and somehow removed all the racism from the hearts and minds of the people, of all people alive today, quite a lot of racism was simply grind forward unabated. What was it? Quite a lot of racism would simply grind forward unabated. It's built into the system itself. No interval support required. And that's the end of chapter 5. We're now going to be entering part 2, unconscious and unconscious bias. And that's going to be the start of chapter 5. Excuse me. So we finished chapter 4 just to show proof. Boom. So let me hold up. If you notice I keep cutting, it's because I'm whoops. If you notice I keep cutting, it's because blow my nose. Just allergies. I have the fan on because it's been warm today, but yeah, I've been out in the sun, so like I'm trying to cool off, but then like allergies trying to hit. I took my allergy meds, but still. So the reason why I picked this book, I usually try, not every time, right, go for 3 books whenever I go to the library with my lady, or I guess in general. There was one that was the 4 Disciplines of Execution, DX, which that was cool. I didn't read the rest of like at a certain point because it was just like a bunch of like, there was no benefit to me. And this is more like a self-help business book, which I did get some stuff which helped me organize my goals, tasks, and my planner way better than what I ever had before. Certainly before I started reading. So that book did help me. So I'm like, all right, cool. But I'm like, all this shit, I don't really need to fucking see. Boom. I got the point. But this book I got because, okay, something scientific, right? And with this book, a lot of it is, actually most of it is, yeah, fuck how you feeling about this. This is just the facts of the science of racism. And from reading now 4 chapters, thank you for reading with me, or hearing me read, it made me realize that the world has a lot of racism in it, especially in the capitalist society, specifically in America and the UK. And it's like I'm not. It's kind of like how the book says. So it's like, yeah, some of this you kind of already fucking have an idea, but you probably don't know some of this. So and yeah, like a lot of it is pretty much shit I've heard before, and I'm like, okay, so this is just facts. Okay, well, fuck me, dude. But yeah, and it's crazy. Especially towards Black people, bro, which is fucking wow. I'm not surprised, right? Which is like unfortunate that's the case, but also towards like Indians, Latinos, etc., right? And it's like, damn, it's just innately ingrained in these two societies, and I don't really have an answer of what to do. But I think it's so important to be aware of it because now you have a better idea. Like, oh, okay, so these policies that you should get enacted maybe in your town, you're able to go, oh, well, who the fuck are y'all trying to target with these fucking law changes, right? Um, and even like the language and the rhetoric and the optics that you see and hear and get used, you start hearing it in a different way. You're like, wait, huh? Hold up, hold up. Now with this book, it's like, hold up, I actually have the data to go. No, bro, that's some shit. Like, um, this is in the book. Again, you can literally go fact check in this book and quote me if I'm wrong. Whatever. Basically, yeah, people tend to have a higher rate to shoot Black people in general. Police also do at a less rate, which was interesting. However, as the book says it, it's because they actually get trigger like training and discipline, so that rate, so they're not immediately going bang. Although I don't think if you're a Black person or anyone affected by this, you give a fuck about. Oh, I'm glad it's a less percentage. Black people are still at a higher rate of danger, which is why having higher gun control laws helps, because holy shit, dude, already by default, off rip, they're entering a world in which they're in a higher rate of danger around someone with a gun than not. Ain't that some shit? I don't give a fuck. Look, the whole argument of, well, you know, they learned it from their parents and their family and maybe culture, whatever. Or if it's like, no, it's just because of the society that they live in, all that. I don't care. That, you can figure all that out. The fact of the matter is, it's still dangerous. Being a Black individual in America, in the UK, at the very least, this is from this book's mainly been talking about. But that's crazy. Hell, at least in America, you can have a gun. You know what I mean? Like, fuck. It's some shit, bro. But yeah, this is a great book. I'm gonna keep reading. This should be a lot. We're already at 20-minute mark, which probably like 18 minutes with me cutting. But yeah, you can see how this is interesting. This is at my fucking library. I didn't buy this. Now I'm like, hey, I need to buy another book from Keon West at some point because yeah, fascinating, genuinely. But it's also like, damn, you know what I mean? And it's like easy to go now and be sympathetic either towards like either just Black people or in general other people, right? But like, damn, bro, this is like eye-opening. It really is. Now we begin chapter 5. They know not what they do, the unconscious bias narrative. Again, that is the science of racism. Everything you need to know, but probably don't yet. Let's begin. I know I started like at page 62. The next chapter, this chapter's going to end in 82, 83? 84 is when chapter 6 starts. So 83, yeah. All right, let's begin. A perpetually vexing aspect of the study of racism is that the apparent lack of any actual racist. As chapters 2 and 3 have shown, racism is real, significant, empirically detectable. So I'm going to assume it's findable, right? And almost everywhere. But if that's true, then why can't we tell where it's coming from? Who are the people doing all these racist things? And why? Oh, my bad, my teeth are bothering me. I have a random urge to start like using my tongue on my. I don't know. It's weird. I know. You know, you get random things. Who are the people doing all these racist things? And why can't we identify them? There is no small problem, and for a time, it was a matter of genuine scientific concern. If you enter any company or speak to any search committee and ask them if they discriminate against ethnic minorities in their hiring practices, they will all, or nearly all, tell you that they don't. And yet, if you then send them a few hundred or thousand identically qualified CVs, this was in chapter 1, I believe, or chapter 2. Basically, they had like exact same qualifications, exact same experience, all this stuff. And the only difference was a white sounding name and a Black sounding name. and they set them to very different types of jobs with very different types of fields, etc., etc. And the results was white people have a higher chance of a callback than a black person would. Yeah. Fascinating. You should read that though, because it already makes you go like, oh my god, bro, right? Which is why when you've heard jokes in the past about, yeah, bro, I need to make my application sound more white. Yeah, yep. And then when they find out when they're eating with them, right? It's the whole joke. If you missed it, that's your fault. But yeah, anyway. They will predictably and reliably select the white CVs more often than the black ones. Similarly, if you ask any teacher or educator if they discriminate against ethnic minority students, they'll say that they don't. And yet, when you hand them 100 or 1,000 pieces of equivalent work, they will rate the work by black students as worse than the work of by white students. That was another chapter, etc., etc. It's a good summarization. Wow. If you ask any medical professional if he or she discriminates against ethnic minorities, you're likely to get a stern dressing down and a request to leave the premises immediately. However, when you run the numbers, you'll see that the ethnic minority appointments are scheduled to occur later than the ones for white people, and the ethnic minorities are less likely to be offered crucial, life-saving treatments. Again, ethnic minorities are less likely to be offered crucial, life-saving treatments. And if you ask any 3-year-old or 4-year-old if they prefer white people to black people, well, a lot of them would just say yes, because kids are like that. And most of them haven't learned the finer points of social norms. Remember, for example, the 2019 findings of Perzik and the colleagues mentioned in chapter 3, which go read that. But I think we can all accept that the 3 and 4-year-olds aren't the ones responsible for all the racism in hiring, policing, customer service, healthcare, and essentially everything else. So what's going on? Frustratingly, the problem goes even deeper. Even if you ask people anonymously, even if you ensure, sorry, I'm like keeping track of something. Even if you ensure that they know there will be no negative consequences for revealing their true thoughts or feelings, you'll still find that almost nobody thinks of themselves as a racist person. This is not a claim I make idly, mind you. This is not a claim I make idly. In 2019, West, that's me, the author, by the way, and Eden published interesting findings on just this topic. For our study, we asked 148 people to judge how racially egalitarian they were compared to both people in the wider society and to other people in the room with them at the time. 1 sec. I shouldn't be afraid to look this up or look up a word because goddamn it, that's how you learn. Also, you know, Kai Cenat, same thing. I don't even watch Kai Cenat. That's the crazy thing. Egalitarian, favoring social equality. All right, got it, gang. Favoring social equality. Okay, I see. How racially equal they were. Okay, got it. They were compared to both people in the wider society and to other people in the room with them at the time. We gave them a rating scale of 0 to 99. I got 99 problems, but such that 0 would indicate that you are at the very bottom or more racist than almost everybody else. 50 would indicate that you were exactly average, and 99 would indicate that you were at the very top or less racist than almost everyone else. If the participants were rating themselves accurately, we should have found that about half of them gave themselves scores that were lower than 50, indicating that they were more racist than average. And half of them should have given themselves scores that were higher than 50, indicating that they were less racist than average. This, however, was not all that we found. Instead, we found that everyone gave themselves scores that were higher than 50, regardless of the context in which they were comparing themselves. That means that even when they were just considering how they ranked compared to the other people in the room with them on that day, every single person thought that they were less racist than the average. You don't have to be much of a mathematician to understand that this is not how averages works. How can we possibly square these two findings, a world in which there is widespread, significant, detectable racism in almost everything, but simultaneously a world in which hardly anyone anywhere admits, even to themselves, that they think, feel, or do racist things? This is the problem that research on implicit bias was perfectly poised to solve. Subtitle, now we're at page 71. Implicit bias research to the rescue. Few things are more boring than a pendant who is a stickler for the terminology of the field of their field of expertise. Sadly, I must take that role now. Forgive me. Forgive him. You're forgiven, Keon. I want you to note that I did not use the term unconscious bias, although I know that it is now a very widely used term. For example, in the 2022 documentary series Harry, I'm going to assume that's and Meghan, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, whom I consider both well-intentioned and reasonably well-informed about racism for a very rich, very privileged, very white man, used it to explain both his earlier racist behaviors and some of the attitudes of other members of his family. There are many, many books about unconscious bias. The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias by Pamela Fuller, Sway, Unraveling Unconscious Bias by Pragya Agarwal, Unconscious Bias, or Everything You Need to Know About Our Hidden Prejudices by Annie Burdick. I'm going to actually take a photo of these because I want to read these. That's all I'll pull up, son. If I see something that gets my curiosity, I'll go, oh, bet, let me read that later. And I will. Eventually. Unbiased, Addressing Unconscious, page 72. Unconscious Bias at Work, yeah, by Stacey A. Gordon, and the list goes on. And then the beat goes on and on. Even in books that I really like, then that have been, you guys know I'm reading, right? I don't want no one to be like, he's not actually reading. Motherfucker, you can look it up yourself. Even in the books that the entertainer in me is coming out, you know. Even in books that I really like and that have been reviewed as excellent guides to contemporary bias, such books such as The Authority Gap by Marie Ann Seichart, I recommend that you read this book. All right, bro. Excuse me. I'm not cutting that. Motherfucker said, yeah, bro, read this book. All right, man, I got you. Hold on. Dame tiempo. The term unconscious bias is used very liberally, and quite a lot of bias is attributed to unconscious beliefs and motives. However, unconscious bias was not the term used by Greenwald, McGee, and Schwartz. Oh, Guinness McGee from fucking 49ers. No. The team of scientists who in 1998 invented and... Wait, what? In 1998, invented and popularized, my bad, these now widely used measures of hidden prejudice. In fact, they only mention the word unconscious once in their original 1998 scientific paper. The term they use most often, the term that shows up 91 times in the original paper, is implicit. Now, this seemingly subtle difference in terminology is a matter of some importance because, as you'll see, excuse me, Jesus, I had a monster. That's probably why I'm like, and I had a latte. As you'll see, implicit bias and unconscious bias mean quite different things. Let's return to the problem that scientists are trying to solve. Scientists knew that there was a lot of bias out there, but they were having a hard time identifying the people most likely to behave in biased ways. Some mechanism was needed that could detect bias in individuals whether or not they are admitted to it. A mechanism that could then be used to predict an individual's likelihood of behaving in a certain specific biased ways. These were the implicit measures of bias. I'll briefly describe how they work here. However, I would strongly recommend that you visit the Project Implicit website to do an implicit associations test yourself. This will only take a few minutes and will give you much more visual understanding of their mechanisms than anything I can say now. Nonetheless, to explain briefly, the implicit association test, IAT, and many other implicit measures of bias work by seeing how quickly and accurately you can respond to the stimuli in particular combinations. For example, the test might quickly display a set of words on a screen at a time and ask you to categorize them under the headings good, for example, love, happiness, and bad, for example, sadness and death. The test might also display a set of faces on one screen and at a time and ask you to categorize them under the headings white and black. The scientists could then see how easily you can combine certain categorization tasks. For example, most people find it very easy to use the same computer key to categorize good things and white people, but very difficult to use the same computer key to categorize good things and black people. And when they try to do that second task, they take longer and they make more mistakes. By comparing the performances across different combinations, the scientists can generate a single score, their implicit bias test score, that indicates the person's level of bias. The Project Implicit website makes it even easier for you by offering you an interpretation of your test result. For example, strong automatic preference or slight automatic preference or preference for one group or another, instead of just your numerical score. Now, the implicit association test, which was invented in 1998, so soon to be 30 years old, right? Because it's 2026, January 14th at the time of this recording. I should have this out today, so enjoy. Is now old enough to drink, drive, and get married. Many follow-up experiments have dismissed potential criticism of the test, such as suggestions that the results were merely due to the order of the task or to irrelevant associations with other concepts, for example, white and black as colors. If you really are interested in such discussions, I recommend that you read Nozick and colleagues, Nozick, Greenwald, et al. 2007. Why is it et al? Hold up. It's literally et al. What does that mean? Et al. It's an adverb. And hold up.
Et al.
Et al. Okay. It's usually an abbreviation of it's ali or masculine plural or it's ale feminine. What does that mean? Found elsewhere? Oh, okay. Like you can. Okay. So in this sense, I've already lost my place. God damn it. One sec. Page 73. Blah blah blah. Penis. What? Okay. If you. There goes the age rating. Good. So you can read more of Nozick or Greenwald or Seghart and all the other, and McGee and all the other people that he named. I got it. Got you. Their paper, The Implicit Association Test at Age 7. A methodological and conceptual review. For now, however, all you really need to know is that the implicit association test and other tests like it can produce a score for an individual's level of implicit racial bias. Best of all, these individual implicit bias scores don't rely on the person's awareness of their own bias or their willingness to honestly tell you. Or in the words of Professor Anthony, Anthony, how you doing, man? He's fucking finding what to say. That's only like a reference for like 5 people, and I appreciate every single one of you. Greenwald and colleagues in 2022. Wait, what? In 2002. Or in the words of Professor Anthony G. Greenwald and colleagues in 2002, there are well-known problems with self-report measures because they depend crucially on A, subject's willingness to report private knowledge, and B, subject's ability to report such knowledge accurately. Consequently, self-report measures can go astray when respondents are either, doesn't matter, unwilling or unable to report accurately. In other words, you can't just ask people, how racist are you, dude? And expect them to get a useful answer because you're depending on them to both accurately tell you how racist they are and also be willing to tell you honestly. Neither of those two conditions can reasonably be assumed to be true. I like how I'm fucking speaking. I'm a hand guy, you know what I mean? I like the... Right. As I'm fucking now doing Italian shit. or proceed Italian, right? I proceeded to... We had a whole arc, me and my homie. We saw a bunch of Italian movies. Don't worry about it. We finished off with Goodfellas. Wow. Incredible movie. Okay. Okay, yeah. Neither of those two conditions can reasonably be assumed to be true, at least not all the time. Implicit measures of racism and other biases are therefore any measures of bias that get around these two problems. There are measures that can detect bias in objective quantifiable ways, even when an individual is unwilling or unable to report their levels of bias to you. Individual. I just sounds like rapping. As the original, wait till you guys read with me an ADHD book, and we're just gonna figure out. So that's why CDP's like that. Yes, as the original researchers in 1998, let's keep going. Let's keep reading. As the original researchers in 1998 hoped it would, further research has shown that this score usefully predicts actual behavior toward ethnic minorities. Recall, for example, the 2007 study by Green and colleagues on whether, wow, Nigeria, Morocco are going to penalty. I mean, I had Morocco. That's what's crazy. I have Morocco and Senegal at the final for the AFCON Cup. Let me know if I was right. I'll probably find out. Anyway, sorry. As the original researchers in 1998 hoped it would, further research has shown that this score usefully predicts actual behavior toward ethnic minorities. Recall, for example, the 2007 study by Green and colleagues on whether or not doctors would offer Black people with a deadly condition, myocardial infarction, which was the specific, I think, disease or ailment or condition that they had, is what was used in that study. To give you guys some context. The life-saving treatment, thrombolytic therapy, the solution. If the researchers had access only to the doctor's explicit declarations of how they felt about Black and white patients, then they would have reported that the doctor showed no preference for white over Black people, and it would have been a total mystery as to why some of these doctors failed to offer Black patients the correct treatment. Why did I say it like that, though? That's crazy. However, Green and colleagues didn't just have the doctor's explicit statements. They also, I need to do that test. That's what I need to do. They also had access. This is over before it already began, huh? Colleagues didn't just have the doctor's explicit statements. They also had access to their implicit association test scores. And with these scores, they were able to see that some of the doctors did have biases against Black patients and in favor of white patients. They were able to tell which doctors had the strongest biases. See, I had to force that one, you know what I mean? Even though I did it earlier, actually. So, I mean, and I'm going to keep moving. Anxiety's trying to kick in. Even though we're able to use that information to successfully predict which doctors were least likely to offer Black patients the correct treatment. In this case, implicit racism scores were useful predictors of doctors' behavior toward Black people. Similarly, in 2010, Ruth, I assume another author, tested whether scores on the implicit association test could be used to predict hiring discrimination. Okay, that's how you type that in. To do this, he first did the usual CV experiment, with which you should all be very familiar with at this point, across 2 experiments. He recruited 351 employers, 193 in the first experiment, and 158 in the second. He then set these employers the CVs of some potential employees. As ever, these employees were identically qualified. So this is similarly what he did in the chapter 2 or 1 or 3, one of those. With the whole job application thing, and also I think it was like certain assignments and what have you. It's 1-1. Holy shit. Morocco miss. Ooh, Hamza, how could you? But half of them had white sounding names, and in this case, they were white Swedish names. Yeah. Because the experiment was conducted in Sweden, while the other half had ethnic minority names. In this case, they went with Arab Muslim sounding names. Unsurprisingly, as in so many other experiments of this kind, Ruth found that applicants with white sounding names had a higher callback rate. Which, if you remember the beginning of this fucking video, I mentioned white people had a higher callback rate than Black people. So now, that's also on top of Arab Muslim sounding names. Unsurprisingly, as in so many other experiments, I would be curious to see between the Arab Muslims and Black people who had the higher rate. Ruth found, unsurprisingly, as in so many other experiments of this kind, Ruth found that applicants with white sounding names had a higher callback rate than otherwise equivalent applicants of Arab Muslim sounding names. 9% higher in the first experiment, 17% higher in the second. Ruth then went one step further. He contacted the employers again and convinced them to complete implicit association testing to the score of their bias in favor of white people and against Arab Muslims. He then tested whether this implicit score could predict which employers would be most likely to pick the white sounding applicant over the identically qualified Muslim sounding applicant, and it worked. Higher levels of implicit anti-Muslim bias, which, to be fair, I think after 9/11. Well, this is the UK, huh? Okay. I guess it would still spread that type of rhetoric outside of America, right? Absolutely, right? You had everything that happened with Iran. Israel Palestine's been happening for so fucking long. Goddamn. Blame the British for that one. I should read a book about that. And then people, ooh, yeah, about a farm controversy. Shout out Eric Bischoff. It's a wild pull I just made for two specific references. He then tested whether this implicit score could predict what. Yeah, we saw that, and it worked. Higher levels of implicit anti-Muslim bias predicted in a greater likelihood of rejecting the Muslim job applicants and over selecting the white job applicants. There are other examples. In 2016, Jacoby Senghor, Sinclair and Shelton Benjamin, page 76, by the way, recruited 210 white people and asked them to take on the role of an instructor who would deliver a lesson to another participant in the experiment. Now, the second participant, let's call them a learner, or let's call them the learner, excuse me, what was the, hold on, my bad. Recruited 210 white people, asked them to take the role of the instructor, deliver a lesson to another participant. Got it. The second participant, we'll call them the learner, was randomly varied to be either white or black. Now, the instructors also completed a seemingly unrelated task, which was actually a test of their implicit black bias. But not an implicit association test this time. Okay, but still an implicit bias test. Now, the instructors were then given time to prepare and allow to deliver their lessons to the learner. All the lessons were videotaped to see how well the instructors were performing, and all of the learners took a test at the end of the lesson to see how effective the instructors had been. My bad, the penalty thing's going off. Morocco might be doing it. We'll see. At the end of the experiment, Jacoby Senghor and the colleagues found that the white instructors who were teaching black learners were more anxious and delivered lower quality lessons than, the black learners who also performed worse overall than the white learners. Before you're tempted to say that the last result might have occurred because the black learners were simply less able than the white learners, I'll point out that the researchers also found a clear relationship between the instructors' implicit bias scores and the learner's performance. Okay, I have the pen fell. I know. Just my thigh. Implicit bias had no effect on. I don't mean to cut that. Sorry. I'll stop looking at the results. Implicit bias had no effect on how the instructors interacted with the white learners. So we'll ignore that for now. Also, if the instructors had low levels of implicit bias, the black and white instructors had low levels of implicit bias. Did I read that right? Implicit bias had no effect on how the instructors interacted with the white learners, so we'll ignore that for now. Also, if the instructors had low levels of implicit bias, the white and black learners performed the same on the test. However, if the instructors had high levels of implicit bias and they were teaching black learners, so if they had a high implicit bias and they were teaching black learners, okay, their anxiety went up, their lesson quality went down, and the learner's performance on the test declined. Jesus Christ, bro. The ethnicity-based achievement gap. I want to reference real quick. There was even something in here about they took a bunch of teachers and showed them videos, and they were told like, oh yeah, kids you're gonna be seeing examples of like, oh, this is bad behavior in the classroom, right? And for the most part, I think the video showed like no bad behavior at all, but innately a lot of teachers tend to look at the black student at a higher rate for at least saying there was some bad behaviors being shown, or just that they were keeping an eye on them first and foremost, which is like, come on, man, what the fuck are we doing here, right? For an educator, mind you, who shouldn't be having that type of rhetoric in their subconscious or pre-context, or I forgot what this is. You're something whatever, you get what the fuck I mean. Your frontal lobe, whatever the fuck it is, not the fucking fucking whatever. It's a whole other thing. I gotta read the DHT book for y'all. That's a great book. It's a great book. Anyway, jab. So another example of how racism is kind of fucking everywhere, and it's innate, and it's in our fucking education, and it's just that's why it's like, okay, I read all these things, right? And more and more I'm like, yeah, it's important that we have more diversity in everywhere, because you've already heard, and you guys have only heard the end of chapter 4, and we're going through chapter 5, right? And already this should already show you, holy shit, bro, there's so much racism. We can't just have one type of culture in one type of company or job or store, whatever, because they're gonna miss out on this type of knowledge, which shows that they're gonna have a higher rate of discrimination and prejudice against Black people or Arab Muslims, right? In this current example in this video here, so that could be used for gaming, in the fucking military, in the police, which we've already said early on. Already, Black people have a higher rate to get shot at. So already, what the fuck, dude? Imagine if the whole police force was white, right? Now every fucking town, Black people gotta just be by default, even, I mean, in general, right? Every one of us have to be kind of like, oh shit. But like, that's crazy, bro. Fuck. And people that in the political landscape, like, yeah, it's important we have people that are not just one type, or in this case, just a bunch of white people, because you're not gonna like already innately we're seeing this. I wish they added like Latino data in this for my own sake, because I'm Mexican, right? Mexican American, Chicano pride, right? So it's yeah, I need to read more Mexico and Chicano stuff, because I was looking a little bit at Chicanoism yesterday. Pacho Villa, queued up Cesar Chavez, right? And it's just crazy. Like I want to get a Chicano tattoo if I can as well. This is for another day. But yeah. Okay. However, and the instructors had a high level of implicit bias, and they were teaching Black leaders. Their anxiety went up. Blah 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 blah. Yep. It's okay. Got it. We're back. The ethnicity based achievement gap only appeared when the instructors had high levels of implicit bias. It's hard to imagine a clearer indication of the power of implicit bias in educational settings. The results of Jacoby Segnor's experiment clearly showed that instructors with high levels of implicit bias lead to worse outcomes for ethnic minority learners. Learners who would have performed just as well as their white counterparts if the instructor's levels of implicit bias had been lower. How many kids have been affected by that, you know? My gen probably did. The couple gens out. Every gen, really, right? It's crazy, man. I'm taking a pause. Like, I really want you to, like, take that moment in of, like, damn, bro. This is just studies in, like, you know, more recent years. Could you imagine when shit was worse 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, right? It's fascinating, but in a tragic way and in a frustrating way, honestly. But yeah. Do you like the fire behind me, by the way? It's just a YouTube video I just queued up to have in the background. I thought this would be a nice setting. Maybe we do like a water one, is what I was thinking about while I was doing this. Anyway, in 2019, 3 years that the Jacoby Segnor's research was published, Dick Adams, the education editor of The Guardian, published an article on the degree gap between white and ethnic minority students. The article mentioned that Black and Asian students obtained upper seconds or first, these are the highest rated university degrees in the British system, for their undergraduate degrees at significantly lower rates than their white counterparts. Now, the article covered many recommendations on how to reduce this ethnicity-based achievement gap. BAME students, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic students, would benefit from a racially diverse campus environment. University leadership teams are not representative of the student body. Curriculums do not reflect minority groups' experiences. A poor sense of belonging might be contributing to low levels of engagement, and so on. Which again, to harness the point that I was trying to make earlier about we need to have a more diverse group of people in terms of politics, in education, in the police force, and everything. Whatever your political ideology is, which, by the way, if you align with ICE, with pedophiles, or even Israel, go fuck yourself, leave. I would just delete your comment if you say something, bro. I don't care. Yeah. Me, I align with the mindset of humanity. You know what I mean? Anyway, excuse me. They're getting me. No, the nowhere, absolutely nowhere, in the article, but nowhere, absolutely nowhere in the article did Adams mention even the merest possibility that the racial bias of the instructors might be the racial bias of the instructors might be a factor. This is why knowledge of implicit bias research like Jacoby Senghor's matters. Otherwise, we end up with articles on racial achievement gap with no mention of racial bias in instructors, racism without racists. Uh, there are still more examples of the utility of implicit bias measures. In 2007, Ruderman and Ashore found the implicit association test scores predicted participants' self-reported use of racial slurs, their social exclusion of ethnic minorities, their likelihood of causing ethnic minorities physical harm, and their desire to cut the budget of ethnic minority organizations. In each case, the implicit scores predicted these behaviors even after statistically controlling for the participants' explicit racial attitudes. Now, in 2008, other researchers, Greenwald, Smith, Sidium, Baranon, and Nozick, found that the implicit association test could predict which Americans would vote for John McCain or Barack Obama in the U.S. presidential election, even after their explicit attitudes were taken into account. In 2021, Belfar, Afosu, Heman, and DeWall found that the implicit association test predicted which hopeful parents were less willing to adopt a black child. Indeed, their implicit bias scores were better predictors than their explicit bias scores. And I could go on, but hopefully the point has been made. As Greenwald and colleagues hoped back in 1998, implicit bias scores have proven their usefulness in the scientific community, and they allow us to detect bias and to predict who is most likely to behave in a biased way, even if the person is unwilling or unable to admit it. Should bring my water with me. We're on page 78. We're now going to be starting the subchapter of dangers of the unconscious bias narrative. We got about 5 more pages, and then hey GG, about an hour of this. Yeah, appreciate you for coming on in and watching. I might even do a live session at some point. People are gonna be like, "What the fuck is this? We're reading, son." So far, let's start. Or let's continue. So far, this all sounds really good. From what I've said, the scientific research has clearly demonstrated the existence of implicit bias and has clearly shown that implicit bias scores can be useful for predicting actual discriminatory behavior, medical discrimination, hiring discrimination, educational discrimination, political discrimination, familial discrimination, and so on. So, yeah, that's all true. Why do I keep hitting darkly at a problem with the unconscious bias narrative? Was it Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, correct to attribute his past behavior and the current behavior of some of his family members to unconscious bias? Well, to explain my concerns, I like to return the interesting phrasing that Greenwald and colleagues use when describing implicit bias. Bias that a person might be unwilling or unable to tell you about. And why exactly might a person be unwilling or unable to unaccurately report their own levels of racism? There are many, many possible reasons, which I've condensed under 3 general headings. The first and most obvious of these is that a person may be perfectly aware of their level of bias, but deliberately misrepresenting these levels to you in an attempt to deceive you. In layman's terms, I believe this is often referred to as lying. The second reason could be that the person is partially or imperfectly aware of their levels of bias, but employing a set of psychological mechanisms to protect themselves from recognizing or admitting their biases. This second reason, which I put under the general heading of psychological trickery, is to me the most interesting one and will get a much fuller treatment in chapter 7. For now, however, the third and final reason why someone might be unwilling or unable to tell you how biased they are could be that the person is completely unaware of their, I love how that flowed, of their own level of bias. I'm only discovering this after taking some kind of implicit bias test. This last reason is the only one that matches the unconscious bias narrative that has become so popular in recent years. This is why I am so pedantic about the distinction between implicit bias, which the scientists like to talk about, and the unconscious bias, which the newspapers like to talk about. Now, research on implicit bias covers a multitude of different types of bias that individuals are unwilling or unable to report explicitly and accurately. From the very beginning, the goal has been to take take types of bias that are difficult to detect and make them easier to detect. It is a set of tools that allows us to better predict who will pick up the white CVs over the black CVs, who will rate the white students' work as better than the black students' work, who will schedule the white patient's appointment sooner than the black patient's appointment, even if the person is in question is unwilling or unable to admit in doing those things. You know what's curious? It just came to me. I mentioned how at some point we will tap into the Quran, and I want people to understand something. I am absolutely serious when I say that. I've shown this before on stream. I do plan to read this Quran, and I'm gonna actually do it with y'all. I've only got into like the second scripture, I guess is what you would call that paragraph. Not paragraph. It's called the cow. People that have read it, they'll know what the fuck I'm talking about. I guarantee you, there might even be a study of it in this book. There's going to be something about clicking a YouTube video based on the thumbnail having a lighter skin person or what have you. Because my thought was, I bet you people would click a video with, if it's me or someone of my skin tone holding the Quran and be like, oh, I want to hear that opinion, rather than an Arab Muslim holding it in the same thing and having the same discussion, same thing, piece and everything, right? Simply because of that same prejudice that we've already seen with applications, with what you guys didn't read it, but with appointments with doctors and medical needs, right? Or certain treatments. I've already forgot, but all that we've been reading, right? I guarantee you that's a fucking thing. And I'm gonna if I'm right, all right, cool, I was right, but that, that fucking sucks, you feel me? Because you would think, let's just look it up. Let's just fucking look it up. Oh, the fire's gone. Hold on. About what percentage of Muslim people or people that are followers of Islam, what percentage of people or Arabs are Muslim? Let's do that. There you go. Because I learned that Muslims isn't the religion or faith, it's Islam. A Muslim is someone that succumbs to the will of God or onto Islam. Around night, I'm going to show this just so people believe me. All right. So 1, 2, 3. Around 90 to 95% of Arabs are Muslim. I know it's going to cut off, but I'll read it. With many reputable estimates clustering at about 93% of Arabs identifying as Muslims. The remaining minority are mainly Arab Christians, including large communities in Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine, smaller communities of Jews, Druze, Baha'is, and others. It is also important to note that Arabs are a minority, of the global Muslim population. Fewer than about 15 to 20% of the world's Muslims are Arab. That's crazy. I didn't know that. What? Okay. Good to know. Another bullet of evidence, right, Dangaropa, that we can use to people when they try to say some shit like that. Because now it's, well, hold on, bro. Only like 15 to 20% of Arabs are Muslims. So what are we talking about, bro? Get your fucking predestined prejudice and racism out of here. Didn't know that. That's fascinating. I did not know that. And now that I know that, I'm like, interesting. It's kind of sad though, huh? That like you have this connection innately because of media, whether that's news, movies, entertainment, etc., etc. It turns out, actually, bro, that's like maybe a fifth of their followers, which is like, oh shit, did not know that. I fuck around, become a Muslim myself. You know what I mean? And no, I'm gonna say this in the video itself, but I don't plan to subscribe any ideology, any criticisms or opinions that I have about the Quran. Keep in mind that I do plan to read the Bible, whether that's the Judeo-Christian Bible, whether that's King Arthur's fucking Bible, whatever. I don't give a shit. I'm gonna have the same thing. I'm not here for the ideology. I'm here for the good lessons. Because already there was some shit that I read about, yeah, man, fucking people are gonna like say, oh, I'm not a follower, but then they'll laugh about it. But then, when their time of judge becomes, and then, they go, oh, I was kidding, it was just a joke. It'll be Allah and our followers that laugh at them. And I was like, what the fuck? Well, that's crazy. But then I asked my homie, I'm not going to say his name, but he knows, who is a Christian. When I told him, I was like, no, yeah, that's like, yeah, we do the same thing, but God. And it's like, wait, what? So I didn't know that. Also, by the way, Allah is just, it's the same being that Muslims, Persians, and I guess you would that when we say God, right? And that's what you can already assume the religion I'm talking about, right? They're all talking about the same being. They just know them as different names. So I'm like, oh, that's fucking fascinating. I didn't know that. I was never told that because of course I wasn't. I was raised Catholic. Now learning like, oh, hey man, so like this whole Pope thing, and I'm like, this just sounds like a political guy that you use for influence. I don't think me like I grew up at it. I had my not a confession. What did I have? You do like a Saturday school for it or some shit. Whatever. Did that. I don't think I was subscribed. I mean, I don't now, right? But like, yeah, just crazy. But it's fascinating to like, you know what I mean? To learn all this shit. Because then you start going, oh, it's different, but same, right? Yeah, I plan to read, the whatever that is for the Hindus. I don't know. I want to read whatever the book is for Buddhists, right? Like that's what I want to do. Because then I can go and when a motherfucker wants to use their holy book for like their reasoning, for their rhetoric or their actions, I can go, well, hold on, bro. And I pull it up, be like, where? Show me right now. Where does it say that in this book? Oh, you didn't know homie was reading it, huh? Or knew about that shit. Oh, cool. But I could also then go, well, hold on, bro. Why are you guys hating each other like that, bro? Because some asshole who's probably a pedo and all of this shit told you to? Why? You guys are actually way more similar than you think. That's my whole reasoning for that. To be able to to be able to check people on the spot, to be able to tell people, hold on, bro, unity, but also just to get the good lessons, dude. That's all it's about. At the end of the day, I think philosophy is the way to be, right? If the gods are just, you live a good life, why the fuck wouldn't they welcome you with them, right? What just God wouldn't? If there are gods and they're fucking assholes and they're not just, but you still live a good life, first of all, why the fuck you want to hang out with them? Fuck them. But you were still a good person. The people that knew you, that loved you, right? Whether it's your family, your friends' family, co-workers, random people, right? That were affected by you and your goodness. You were a good person. That's all that matters. Now, if there are no gods at all, but you were still a good person, like I just said, bro, you lived a great life. You were still good, and all the other reasons I said about friends, family, friends, all that, right? You were still a good person. That's what matters. Now, of course, if you don't give a fuck, either way, you don't give a fuck, so who cares? But, yeah, man. Little preface towards when we eventually dive into the religion, which I'm sure nobody's gonna get mad at me about. Anyway. So, let's continue once we can stop this, because it's already been over a fucking hour. God, bro. Yeah, you see why I don't have as much time to read, just because it's like, oh man. But and then I'll like grab my phone or whatever. Maybe I'm replying to my lady or on Twitter or like I see some other shit. I go to a whole day and it's like, oh fuck, I gotta read. Fuck, and then it's just like you never actually do the thing. But in having time specifically scheduled to do the thing, you're doing the thing. Right. It's nice. It's fucking 3:00 in the afternoon. I got gym with my wifey at 6:00. It'll be great. After I finish this, we'll do some chores. Go for a walk. Go on some Duolingo. Learn French. I'm trying to lock in on one language. Boom. Go ham. Even though I consider doing other, but don't worry. But yeah, so I'm, you find time for things you care about. You know what I mean? That's what it's all about, man. Okay. Now. Where the fuck were we? Okay, I believe this is often referred to as lying, right? The second reason could be that the person is partially or imperfectly aware of their level of bias, but employing a set of psychological mechanisms to protect themselves from recognizing or admitting their biases. This second reason, which I'll put under the general heading of psychological trickery, is to me the most interesting one, and we'll get a much fuller treatment in chapter 7. For now, however, in the third and final reason why someone might be unwilling or unable to tell you how biased they are, could be that the person is completely unaware of their own level of bias, only discovering this after taking some kind of implicit bias test. This last reason is that the only one that matches, sorry, my back, and neck. One that matches the unconscious bias narrative that has become so popular in recent years is this is why I am so pedantic about the distinction. So I'm some like a stickler. I don't want to look it up. We're always wasting time. Between implicit bias, which the scientists like to talk about, and unconscious bias, which the newspaper likes to talk about. How many of y'all do that where you are looking up words, but then you're like, bro, I spent too much time looking it up. Let's just keep going. Another day, another session. I'll look up other words. There you go. Research on my bad. I don't want to cut the tone of it all, right? The research on implicit bias covers a multitude of different types of bias that individuals are unwilling or unable to report explicitly and accurately. From the very beginning, its goal has been to take types of bias that are difficult to detect and make them easier to detect. It is a set of tools that allows us to better predict who will pick the white CVs, resumes, over the black CVs, and who will rate the white students' work as better than the black students' work, and who will schedule the white patient's appointment sooner than the black patient's appointment, even if the person is in question is unwilling or unable to admit to doing those things. Now, in contrast, the unconscious bias narrative sweeps away, two of the important reasons why someone might be unwilling or unable to report their level of bias. It ignores both simple deception and complex psychological trickery, leaving us with a narrative in which most or all people are entirely or innocently unaware of their own biases, which probably me, probably you, watching this as well, and anyone else that sees this. As such, the problem with the unconscious bias narrative is that it is inaccurate. Unconscious biases does exist, and it can be objectively detected and can be used to predict certain kinds of biased behavior. Rather, the problem of the unconscious bias narrative is that it ignores and downplays other real damaging manifestations of bias. We have a note somewhere down here that I'll read. Oh, it's at the end of this page. Okay, cool. Page 80, by the way. As such, the problem with the unconscious bias narrative is that it is not that it is inaccurate. Unconscious bias does exist, and it can't be objectively detected, and it can be used to predict certain kinds of behavior. Certain bias behavior, yeah. Rather, the problem with the unconscious bias narrative is that it ignores and downplays other real damaging manifestations of bias. The unconscious bias narrative is restrictive and myopic. And this myopia, what the fuck is myopia? Hold on, I have to look that up. I'm too curious. Nearsightedness or short-sightedness. So hold on. This side shortedness is dangerous. Okay, got it. Oh, okay, got it. Unconscious bias does exist, but it can be objectively detected, and it can be used to predict certain kinds of biased behavior. Rather, the problem with it, though, is that it ignores and downplays the other real damaging manifestations of bias. Oh, I see. So it is useful, but it doesn't paint the whole picture, and it might even undersell it, which if you're a pro wrestling fan like me, you don't want an underseller. You want someone that's selling at the right pace, not overselling, right? But you don't want someone that's just like, motherfucker, sell. That's your veteran right there, right? Like, yeah, bro. Okay, interesting. Did you like how I connected with pro wrestling? You're welcome. That's the kind of thing you could do here at the Juice House. The social plug isn't happening, huh? All right. Well, I have to figure out how to. Matter of fact, hold on. Got it. Jason made these. Made channel is right over there. All the other social plugs. Oh, I'm not on Twitter as much anymore. I took it off my phone just because fuck Elon Musk. But I'll go on my computer and be like, oh shit, let me catch up, and then post on my buffer and all that. But anywho, let's continue on. Fuck, I already figured out where I was. Hold on. No, I can find it. Bam. As an example, in 2019, Dallmeyer and colleagues, Dallmeyer, D-A-U, Mayer, not like Mayor, Mayer, M-E-Y-E-R, and colleagues conducted 4 studies on how people interpret and respond to bias. In one of these studies, study 1B, we'll go with, I added the last part. Study 1B, they recruited 299 participants and got them to read stories about doctors who were treating their patients differently depending on their group membership. In other words, doctors who were behaving with detectable bias towards some of their patients. All the participants read, why did I say it like that? The same scenarios with only one crucial difference. Half the participants also read that the doctors were somewhat aware that they were treating patients differently, while the other half of the participants read that the doctors had no conscious knowledge that they were treating patients any differently. Now, in other words, in one condition, Dahlmeyer and colleagues got the participants to assume that the bias was conscious, while in the other condition, they got the participants to assume that the bias was unconscious. Okay. Now, it is noteworthy that Dahlmeyer and colleagues used the words explicit and implicit, but they did define implicit bias rather narrowly to the participants as attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in ways that we are typically not aware of. And in that light, it seems fair to treat this as a manipulation of beliefs about unconscious bias rather than the broader category. I love how it crosses over to the next page of implicit bias, which covers both lack of awareness and lack of willingness to disclose. Now, after the participants had finished reading the stories, am I on read? I am on read. So what is? Oh, that's the. I see. That's sorry. There's like another bar in my audio mixer, and it's that. It's just muted. Is there a noise to that? Hold on. Did Jason add that? Hold up. Does that have something? No. All right. Cool. I don't know. After the participants had finished reading the stories and the crucial consciousness and unconscious manipulation, the researchers asked each participant to indicate their level of agreement with a new series of statements. These statements assessed several points. First, how accountable the participants thought the doctors should be for their biases. For example, doctors should be held responsible for any bias that they may impact. How they interact with patients. Second, how much they agreed that there should be some form of punishment for biased behavior. Doctors should repeatedly demonstrate bias towards patients, should have their license to practice medicine suspended. And third, how much concern the participants felt about the doctor's bias. The bias I read about in the article is concerning, for example. By comparing these, as I think what they meant, by comparing these responses, the researchers could discern the effects of framing bias as either conscious or unconscious. And what did the researchers find in this study and in other studies of the paper, all of which were variations on the one already described? Dahlmeyer and colleagues found that framing bias as unconscious made the participants care less about the bias, specifically even though the doctor's behaviors were the same and effects of their patients were the same. Now, Dahlmeyer's participants were less concerned about the bias, thought that the doctor should be less accountable for it, and were less we're less convinced that anyone should be punished for it. And if they thought of the bias as unconscious rather than conscious, in the researchers' own words, scholars of stereotyping and prejudice have long expressed concern that emphasizing the role of consciousness, automatic beliefs of engendering discrimination might reduce the perceived culpability of its perpetrators. ... The what, motherfucker? The present findings suggest this concern was well founded. So they didn't care? Is that what I mean? I don't fucking know. There's so many words I want to look up. I don't want to look it up. The danger of unconscious bias narrative is that it preserves the apparent innocence of the person committing the biased behavior and reduces the likelihood that we'll do anything about it. Now, as a social psychologist, I found, again, Mr. Keon West, or Mrs. I actually don't matter. As a social psychologist, these findings put me in a tough position. A huge number of people still don't believe that contemporary racism exists, despite the mountains of empirical evidence confirming that racism is a part of almost everything, almost everywhere, almost all the time. Everything, everywhere, all at once. No. People are still stuck in the conversation about whether or not it is even happening. In that light, one would think that the proliferation of the unconscious bias narrative is the answer to a social psychologist's prayers. Finally, people are acknowledging that bias is real and pervasive. Finally, everyone is talking about contemporary bias and even referencing some scientific papers when they do it. From this perspective, one might assume that the unconscious bias narrative is a blessing, but it's not. I have appeared on radio television many times to discuss bias. I've written in many newspapers about bias. I've been invited to explain my publications about bias. Increasingly, after I have presented the research, at least one well-meaning person frames the conversation in such a way as to imply that all contemporary bias, or at the very least most of it, is now unconscious. I wouldn't have thought that either way. Some people are very much like, they know because they're either around it in the household or their work environment or social media, or especially Twitter. Like, what do you mean? Again, maybe I'm not the common thinker of that belief. I don't know. You let me know in the comments before that. What did you think? Maybe there's a whole research about fuck no. But it is not. I have I have invited. Sorry, my bad, bro. Increasingly, after I have presented the research, at least one well-meaning person frames the conversation in such a way as to imply that all contemporary bias, or at the very least most of it, is now unconscious, a perspective that the scientific research has never suggested and would not support. I find myself repeatedly explaining that some bias is definitely still conscious, and that there are many other people, or many other more interesting and accurate perspectives on bias than the black and white. Pardon the pun. All or nothing, totally explicit or totally unconscious model. Yet, despite my protestations, the dominance of the unconscious bias narrative continues unfeathered. People invite me to talk about the unconscious bias even when my research is about very conscious kinds of bias. People thank me for explaining unconscious bias even when I have explained something else entirely. And I'm sure it feels like we're doing something good with all this discussion of unconscious bias. It is, after all, important to finally acknowledge our biases. However, the research shows that if all we're acknowledging is unconscious bias, then what we're really doing is protecting our own perceptions of innocence, reducing our concerns about the bias we claim to be addressing, and ensuring that nobody is ever held accountable for it. This is not what doing something looks like. This is doing something bad. And we're gonna end it there, as we have now read the remainder of chapter 4 and chapter 5 together. The next video will be on chapter 6, Deception, doing racist things and lying about it. Wonderful book. Again, the science of sorry, I'm trying to get the thumb up. The Science of Racism, everything you need to know but probably don't know yet, by Keon. Fascinating read. Fascinating. Every time I read a chapter, I gotta tell fucking my wifey, gotta tell my homie. God, it's just like, damn, bro. It just shows you how innately this shit is and deeply rooted in so much of our world. And the fact that two different people of two different backgrounds, of two different names, of two different skin colors, can be put in a similar area and have completely different experiences, right? And already percentages are different everywhere for everything. Thank you for joining me. That has been Let's Read The Science of Racism. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. With me, City P, otherwise known as Caesar Blazer. You saw the social plugs. I'll show them to you again. I'll do this again soon. If I have the time and all that blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And we'll continue on. I need to make sure I have personal reading for myself. So when I want a person, although this was a lot of reading. I don't want to fucking read anymore. That's a lot of reading, bro. But we have like the scriptures, right? With the Quran, for example. I'll probably do like 10 of them. Just because like the first one's like the first page. So it's like, all right, well, that's the video. No, come on. Yeah. Hour and 20 minutes or so. 22 is what it says, but you know, I cut it. 23 now. But anyway. I will see y'all again for more reading. Leave a comment if it's weird and you're acting like a Momo. I know, not the H word, YouTube. Mo. Look it up. I'm gonna just delete your comment. Simple as that. Simple as that. I bet you YouTube's still gonna fucking flag this video for what I just said, even though that wasn't what I said. Because that happened to my spiral playthrough with me and my homie Dylan, which I'm still mad about, but we won't talk about it. Even though I just did. I'm out. ADD. What is it? We'll find out. But next time on Dragon Ball. All right, I'll stop. Bye, you guys. Appreciate you for coming. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.